Well, turning now to the Middle East, Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi and the country's foreign minister were killed in a helicopter crash, leaving the country without two of its most influential political figures. Joining us now to discuss this, we have Alex Vatanka, senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Alex, thanks for joining us on this news here. I just want to start on your take on this news. What do you think the next 50 days look like in Iran?
Great to be with you. I think the next 50 days would be more in terms of policies, both domestic and foreign, one of continuity. The fact is that Ebrahim Raisi and his foreign minister, Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, essentially didn't decide Iranian policies, both at home and abroad. They were implementers of the wishes of the two main centers of power in Iran. That's the office of the supreme leader and then the generals in the Revolutionary Guards. Obviously, those two centers of power are still very much alive and kicking, and they are still the main decision makers. And for that reason, I expect mostly to see continuity going forward, certainly in the foreseeable future.
Alex, what about the wider power grab within the nation, the ramifications, the influence that this could have beyond Iran and even beyond the Middle East? How are you looking at that and the possibility of that here?
I mean, look, number one is to find out exactly what happened. I mean, this is a helicopter crash, but as you can imagine, there are all sorts of theories out there in terms of whether there was any foul play involved. And if there was any foul play involved, then the question you also want to ask, foreign adversaries were behind it or domestic rivals of Raisi? I don't have any answers in terms of what happened to that helicopter in those mountains of northwestern Iran. But I think one thing is for sure, you have an Iranian supreme leader who's 85 years old. He's been there since 1989. So 35 years, long time to be in power. And he might be around for another few years, decade, I don't know. But the issue here is that the competition to replace him is already very much underway. And this has resulted in intense kind of almost cutthroat competition among the hardliners. And this is the interesting part. This is not a fight between the so-called moderates of yesterday and hardliners. These are hardliners fighting one another for who should replace the supreme leader when the day comes that he's gone.
Well, what's interesting, too, is that the Iranian people had moved to not exist in a monarchy. And now there's this question about whether or not the voting process is going to involve much of a choice for the Iranian people. What do you make of that change?
To be honest, you don't have to be cynical to believe what I'm about to tell you. Iranian elections haven't mattered since day one, going back to 1979. These are always highly regulated, engineered elections. This is a process where only candidates that have been essentially approved by the supreme leader can run for the presidency, for the parliament, and so forth. So it's, in many ways, it's a nice show that the regime puts on, but the wishes of the Iranian people have never really been reflected in who represents them in public office since 1979.
Given this leadership transition, what does it look like for Iran's ability to navigate what is an extremely complex situation right now within the Middle East?
You know, again, I go back to a point I made earlier, is one of continuity. Raisi wasn't somebody who really stood for anything in terms of big foreign policy vision. Certainly what Iran is doing in the region, if you take the issue of Iranian policies towards Israel, what Iran is doing in places like Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, none of those policies are policies that Raisi came up with or implemented. He inherited them as president in 2021, and he never said no to his superiors, essentially the office of the supreme leader and the Revolutionary Guards. He never pushed back. In fact, he agreed and did what he was asked to do. He was not someone who had a political vision or a base of his own. He was very much someone who came to power back in 1980 as a 20-year-old and spent the next 45 years of his life doing what he was asked to do. And that's why he survived until obviously the helicopter crash.
If Iran is internally focused over the course of the next 50 days dealing with this, what opportunity does that give to Iran's adversaries?
I mean, look, again, I would just be careful in not putting too much emphasis on the role, the centrality of Ebrahim Raisi, because when you hear the title president, you assume automatically, based on Western standards, that means a lot of power. In fact, the one issue he had most power over was economic policy. So he had to find ways to go around the sanctions that the U.S. has imposed on him, on Iran, certainly since the maximum pressure campaign of President Trump starting in 2018. And he failed miserably at that. I mean, Iran is today a single customer economy, essentially. China buys Iranian oil, and that keeps the Iranian economy somewhat alive, but it's shrinking daily. Raisi came in after Hassan Rouhani. He was supposed to fix things. He couldn't. These are some serious structural problems that need to be, essentially addressed. He doesn't have the political vision or the power, and therefore, at home he failed. And as I said earlier, in terms of the region, he just implemented what he was asked to do. If you compare him to someone like Hassan Rouhani, the predecessor, at least Rouhani pretended he could have his own vision. He would push back on the supreme leader and say, maybe we should find some compromises with the United States and so forth. Raisi never did that even, because he knew he wasn't in a position to stand up to the supreme leader who had given him the job on a silver platter.
Alex, really quickly, in our final question here, given what you're saying about the role of the president previously, what is the single biggest potential impact of this?
I think the one thing I will be watching out for as an Iran watcher is if this was foul play, or if Raisi's departure suddenly results in intense competition for power among the hardliners, and that they get to a point where they can't control the infighting anymore. We know that infighting is going on behind the scenes, but if it spills out into the public domain, that would take us to a whole new stage in the evolution of this Iranian regime.
Alex Vatanka, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us here this morning, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.